Flashpoint.
Good morning. With me now, creative loafing political editor and blogger Wayne Garcia, who writes this week on the astounding popularity of Ron Paul, especially among the Wired community. Also with us, Paul Bourgeois, who is a supporter and organizer for the Ron Paul campaign out of Clearwater. Thank you both for being on Flashpoint. Wayne, give us a sense, give us a few factoids that illustrate just exactly how popular Ron Paul is sort of outside the mainstream sphere of political life.
Just to get a sense, you know, because you don't see him on these polls that you see in the daily newspapers and those kind of things all the time.
Right.
But after one of the Republican debates back in May, I believe it was, two different groups had an online survey. Now, these are not scientific, I understand that. Had online surveys, who did best in the debate, who won the debate, and who do you have a favorable opinion of? MSNBC, which had sponsored the debate, Ron Paul, by a large margin, won the online survey of that. People went from 9% having a favorable opinion of him to 49%. I think Giuliani was in the low 30s. That was the next place down.
But again, the difference, this is a poll where the pollsters don't contact you, you contact the organization.
This is not scientific. It doesn't mean that Ron Paul is going to be our next president or anything else. But what it means is there is and it is largely spontaneous. This is not being directed by, a central director at the Ron Paul campaign. They have a very small campaign. But Ron Paul's message has apparently tapped into people like Paul and others, largely, middle-class Americans who feel that especially the federal government has grown out of control and we're in some danger of tyranny. And they are fanatical supporters.
Right. Paul Bourgeois, let me ask you, at what point did you decide this was your guy, and what was it about Ron Paul that made you're a busy furniture store owner, you got a lot of other things to do, but you decided to put a lot of energy into this. Why?
I do. Well, for example, I really believe in Ron Paul because of his views on money, on monetary policy. There's 17,000 foreclosures in Pinellas County right now.
Right.
I think a lot of the policy, the banking policy has to do with that. So I researched this guy, I looked into this guy, and anybody that really does is just amazed at his honesty, his record. His voting record is unbelievable. He's been a congressman for 20 years in Texas, and everybody in Texas loves him. And the guy actually votes with integrity, and he always votes for the Constitution. And he votes for smaller government.
He calls himself a constitutionalist. Is he kind of an aberration out there in Texas, which is a pretty traditional part of the country here? He has not been in lockstep with President Bush on a lot of issues. How has he been able to stay in office?
Well, I think there's a lot of people, there's a lot of ways you can describe him, either as a libertarian, which he was the 1988 libertarian presidential candidate. He finished third, less than 1% of the vote to the first President Bush and Dukakis. I think more than anything else, he's an individualist. He is about the individual and the power of the individual. And for those folks who believe that government doesn't have a role in providing Social Security, doesn't have a role in having a banking system, and a lot of the IRS and having taxes and doing all these other things that we sort of take for granted now in this modern era, they go back to the Constitution itself and what they believe the Founding Fathers would have wanted in this country. So it taps into people, I think, who are sort of rugged individualists. Yeah, you make it or you don't make it on your own. You got to have personal responsibility and get government out of your way, and that would empower the nation and the people.
And Ron Paul has become sort of, we'll come right back to you, but he's become kind of the darling of late-night television, and a lot of media figures have sort of taken him as somebody they want to interview. They've had him on. And on this show, of course, we've taken to running late-night comedy clips. But this interview on the Colbert Report is sort of semi-serious, and it's a little bit revealing, and it tells you something about the candidate, Ron Paul. This is Ron Paul on the Colbert Report.
You do not have to give up your liberties.
You recently said, in a recent speech, you said, it is dissent from government policies that defines the true patriot and the champion of liberty. It is that kind of talk that lost the Republicans the last election.
And they deserved it.
But you're a Republican. You're out of power now.
But they did not follow that dictum, and they didn't follow the Constitution. They went to war.
Because they ran away from the president. They dissented with him, and they no longer had a unified shield to keep out the mongrel hordes of the Democrats.
I don't think so. They did
not
run.
Of course you don't think so.
They didn't run away from the president, and they lost. I ran away from the president, and I won.
Okay, Paul Bourgeois, you admire that sort of maverick spirit, I'm sure.
Yes.
Were you politically active prior to this, or is Ron Paul somebody that's actually gotten you interested in politics and voting?
I've never really followed a campaign particularly before, and this one obviously is completely atypical for me, and it is for most people. We find, what I'm learning, all the guys that come out to the meetup groups, people that are coming out and being extremely active, a lot of times it's their first time. People are excited about getting government out of our lives, because we find that the more government is involved in anything, the worse it is. They can't manage anything. Look at FEMA. Look at what happened in New Orleans. Look, anytime the government is involved in anything, the price goes up. Look at health care. The price is going out of the roof, you know. Look at cell phones. There's no government intervention. The prices went down. Look at computers. There's no government intervention. The prices went down. So we feel when the government gets involved, it's not government's role to run our lives. We're supposed to run our own life, you know?
That's kind of a mystery to me, Wayne. It seems to me like a libertarian running for president is a little oxymoronic.
Yeah,
it's
I'm running so I can dismantle the very thing I'm running for, in a way.
Ed Begley Jr. wanting to be heading up NASCAR. It doesn't make any sense.
That's
because
what our forefathers wanted. They wanted small, limited government. They want the people to run the government. They don't want the government to run the people. And that's really what we're about.
He wants to get rid of Medicare, for example. I mean, how do you square that when you want to get rid of something that's an obviously successful safety net for millions and millions of elderly Americans?
Well, he doesn't see, he's way down. I mean, we obviously can't get rid of Medicare right now. But what he would do is over several years, he would phase it out to the point where people, if you get government out of insurance, then the price for insurance will go down so that everyone can really afford it.
But you'd acknowledge that a guy who says he wants to get rid of the IRS, for example, is really calling for a revolution. I mean, a dramatic departure from anything we're doing.
It's a fact.
It's got to be, that's a pretty scary prospect for most Americans.
Yeah, well, you find out that when you really look into it, the IRS only collects 30% of what the government collects. That's all. It's only 30%.
So he feels that could be made up in other places. You're a young guy. How old are you, Paul?
35.
35. Ron Paul he's kind of a gentlemanly, he's like a 19th, 20th century kind of guy. He's a grandpa. He's a doctor, right, by trade.
OBGYN.
Why is he appealing to so many young people in particular, Wayne?
Well, I think because really, you know, so many people don't feel like they fit into either party, and Ron Paul really doesn't fit into either party. I mean, he's been from day one against the war. So progressives in the Democratic Party would look at him and go, yeah, that's great, because he doesn't believe in a lot of foreign intervention. It's not what the Founding Fathers intervened. He doesn't want us to be the world's policeman. So on one end, that's very, very appealing. On the other end is the fiscal responsibility, which appeals to the conservatives, and then libertarians come in, all these different people. I think there's a whole lot of people, and especially younger voters, who have never been involved in the system, because the system never gave them a choice that they got excited about. And I'm not saying this is the choice for everybody, because there are some people, and I'm sure there's lots of people out there going, well, you know, I really can't see doing without some of these government functions. But there are a lot of people who got very excited, mainly because this is a campaign where people like Paul and others, they're doing it themselves. Ron Paul is not telling them what to do. They go out, they get 40, 50 people on a street corner waving signs, trying to educate people about Ron Paul. I wrote on my blog this week, one of our reporters came back from International Plaza. He had a Ron Paul business card that had been stuck on his windshield wiper. So they feel sort of empowered because there isn't a big money machine. There isn't a big mechanism to sort of shut them out and say, no, you're going to lick envelopes in a back room somewhere. They feel like they can go out and make a difference, and I think that's why they're so adamantly involved, especially on the internet.
Well, what's the model here? The Jesse Ventura phenomenon, where you had a situation where a lot of young people who were never really politically engaged before kind of got excited about his candidacy and blew everybody's mind when they came out and actually put him into office. Could that happen on a national level?
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. You know, all the politics tends to, what I found, at least for myself, I was really polarized. I was a Republican, and I look at these Democrats and I go, I can't even imagine being a Democrat. The Democrats, I go, oh, you're Republican. You know, we're really polarized. There's liberals, there's conservatives. Well, what I find is that the thing that glues everybody together, or is supposed to glue everybody in this country together, is the Constitution. It's what we're supposed to all agree in, and that has gone by the boards. You know, we got government telling us how to teach our kids. Education has obviously gone way down. You know, we've got government in our lives everywhere. You get it out, and we run the country much better. you know?
Well, I think a lot of people who voted for George Bush 3 years ago and 7 years ago thought that